Sounds like projecting really just roasted for it.
I gotta do it again tomorrow. So I can't go too hard.
Ask Lisa what she's doing tomorrow, just in case you just wipe yourself out. She said she's busy, so you're stuck with it. I was like, just in case Dave has no voice tomorrow, like can't do it. Someone else from Distillery to stand in. Just she's like literally just hitting something. I'm like, we're doing tomorrow.
I'll be here one hour.
Got only 2 bottles. We at the whiteboard. Draw pictures.
So we just make it like Pictionary.
Yeah. Very different. Memorable.
That's for that.
Something else.
Alrighty. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. And thank you everyone for joining us here at the Archie Distillery on a Wednesday night for what is, thankfully for me, the final night of Sydney Whisky Forum 2020. Obviously, we are doing this tomorrow night, but that's all right. Don't worry about it.
They blend into one. Scotty by this point.
I have no idea what day it is. That's all right. As I don't think anyone does have any idea what day it is this year, because as we all know, 2020 has thrown so many different things our way this year, from droughts hanging over from 2019 into bushfires into a global pandemic, the likes of which we haven't seen in any of our lifetimes. So it doesn't feel particularly great to start whinging about the fact that I can't have Sydney Whisky Fair this year, because there's more important things in the world. But I think we've all missed getting together and having a bit of a chat and talking in person to person. We've done that in a lot of different ways. I'm sure you all have done a lot of silly Zoom chats and done Friday night pubs over the past 6 months. But it has been almost exactly 6 months since we had an oak barrel tasting in which we could do this physically. And when we were looking at ways of how we would start to bring these things back, we couldn't fit all of you guys into the oak barrel tasting room tonight. It wouldn't have worked. We could have had maybe 15 of you, which wouldn't have been much fun. So banging our heads against some brick walls and some plaster walls at the oak barrel over the last couple of months, very thankful to work with the team from Archie to come up with a plan that we could do tonight, and not only get everyone together and celebrate the past 2 or 3 years of rye whiskey in Australia, and rye whiskey via Archie but also Archie as an entity that's become part of Sydney in terms of the whiskey and spirits drinking industry, but also launched something that we've been working on for a couple of years now, and I'm very, very excited to launch tonight. I had seen photos, I'd seen single bottles, but there is still something very special about seeing multiple cases of bottles and those labels lined up together. So it's a very, very exciting night for me. There's a lot of relationship and ties between the oak barrel and Archie. Obviously, if people aren't aware, I am the poor man's Dave Withers. He did a much better job.
Absolutely not.
When the oak barrel fell off a cliff about
oranges.
Yeah. The oak barrel fell off a cliff about 6 years ago, as some of you might remember, and that lines up pretty much when Dave Withers came over to be a distiller here, and Scott Fitzsimons went over from the music industry to be a drunkard at Archie Oak Barrel.
Good on you guys for sticking around.
Yeah, so well done. So anyone who's lived through the last 6 years, I do apologise, but thank you for sticking with us. So it's so great to have a cask that's been distilled by Dave, informed by Dave, and sort of essentially chosen by Dave as well as what he thought would be the best cask we could do. I remember talking to Joey last night on the live stream. He recounted as a gallop through the store when the cask sample that eventually became this whiskey was first presented to me by DHR, as I was quite excited about what this was. It also, special about tonight, is something that I think we need to look to the future. We are going live virtually as well as being live here. So if you're everyone watching on live, and I know there's a few of you, I don't know how this is going to work. The audio could be rubbish. I might be mute. You might not see anything, but that's why we haven't sent out anything to you. You just get to watch us stream tonight. But hopefully this is the first step of a lot more interaction, and to a lot of our friends who are doing it really tough in Melbourne and other parts of Australia. I think the Tasmanians are pretending like they don't miss us, but they definitely do. We tend to spend a bit of money at their bars, so they think they're doing all right. But we're looking forward to getting them all. But during this period as well, we're really thinking of them all, and again, just so grateful that Archie were able to mould this space, and for you guys as well for getting on board with signing in, sitting where you were all told to, and so I really appreciate it. But I'm thirsty. I know you're thirsty, and I want to introduce Daniel Hutchins-Read and Master Distiller Dave Withers to take us through some very, very special whiskies tonight. So from me to you guys, round of applause. Thank you.
First time at Oak Barrel tasting, I've actually got to do some housekeeping. Usually it's a Scotty thing, but if anyone does need the bathroom, distillers generally don't go to the bathroom, so we don't have one over here. You're going to have to go next door to the bar, so you don't need to recheck in or anything, but it's to the right of the bar, so feel free to come and go as you need. Other than that, a massive welcome. As Scotty said, there's a lot of time and thought went into this. Obviously, we had to entirely cease production here so that we could fit it all in, which was, we weren't already doing that. So, for those of you who may not be aware, we're in a massive stage at Archie. Obviously, we've grown in a very big way in the last 6 years. We're in the process of moving to a new site at the moment in Botany. So, distillation process. As a distilling company, I find it a little bit humorous that we're currently not distilling anything. But we are moving to bigger and better things as well. This will very much remain our home moving forwards, where our bar and our experiences and where it all began will be. And who knows what in the future. Right? But the new site, very, very exciting, which also means that it gave us this beautiful opportunity, with Whisky Fair, as Scott mentioned, not going ahead in person. For me, I've been a part of Whisky Fair for, I think, 8 out of the last 11 years. So it's a big part of my yearly calendar and something I miss very much. So when we couldn't do it in person, I sort of was like, let's do something really special. I thought that the element of Dave's background with the Oak Barrel as well, the opportunity to use the distillery space was too much of an opportunity to pass up. Plus, I mean, Dave's been sitting on this cask of rye since 2019, just waiting for the right opportunity. So this is very much it. So welcome. How exciting. In person. Everyone's smelled their hands by now with your hand sanitizer from our brief stint in the pharmaceutical business, which was very exciting. That was a really nice time because we were actually able to, we had to shut down the bar obviously for a couple of months, and we were able to fully redeploy our entire bar staff over there, plus a few extras in packing sanitizer and everything. So very, very exciting. But tonight, I've been with Archie Rose since really the start of the year, or the last couple of weeks of December. So I don't think I've actually done what my job would typically be yet, because of coronavirus, obviously. But really exciting, joining a new company. I've obviously come from very much a whiskey background in Archie Rose for the last sort of 5 years. White spirit's been a massive part of it. We have a fantastic vodka, a huge range of gins. Has anyone not actually been to this distillery before? Good on you for putting your hand up. It's a bit of pressure. Well, for those of you, welcome. I think for a lot of general public, Archie Rose is really known for white spirits. We've got a huge range out there at the moment. We've got some fantastic limited releases and everything. But it's not been until late last year that we actually started launching our whiskies. It's sort of a lesser known fact, I think, that we have been producing whiskey since pretty much day one. But obviously whiskey takes time, so it's all been sitting in barrels. And I think it's a really exciting moment for me with my sort of background from whiskey, especially to be able to put together a lineup of 5 whiskies from Archie Rose to share with you guys tonight. We want it to be as special as possible, so not only are we trying the single cask tonight, but we have 2 in the lineup that are completely sold out and never be repeated. Well, I'd like to say never with Archie Rose. And then our rye malt, which at the moment is pretty much sold out as well. So a very, very special evening for you ahead. Dave's been a little bit sick lately, and we're concerned that he's possibly only got this much voice. So we're working out how we ration it out.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about this. Actually, that's all right.
Pretty good.
You can hear me.
If you can't hear, you can tune into the live stream.
Yeah, later. I'll try my best to talk, guys. But if my voice does fail, Dan's going to chip in and sort of do his best for me. He's going to mime
and hand signal and stuff like
that. Yeah, exactly. We'll do a game of Pictionary, which I'm appalling at. So let's not get to that stage.
That's his emu on the board over there, which is terrible.
But yeah, thanks for coming down. Should we drink something?
Yeah, I think I remember one of the bits of advice I got from Michael at Whiskey Galore in New Zealand when he sat in on a tasting with me is get booze in people's mouths quickly, because no one likes sitting staring at the liquid in front of them. So we might start with we've lined everything up with a nice sort of where we're going to go tonight. We're not going to follow that.
Yeah. Just keep you on your toes.
Yeah,
you know.
make sure you're paying attention.
Exactly. After a few drams, we'll just start swapping everyone's glasses and see where you land.
Yeah. Great for coronavirus social distancing. We are, however, going to start with the white rye. So we'll start there. And I think this is a really good one. I think really lucky to have Dave here tonight. I've talked about whiskey and distillation for a long time. I've never really made it, so a bit of a fraud in that sense. But for all of your tough questions tonight, the old handball over to Dave.
So who's had the white rye before? Just a show of hands. Who's had the white rye in the last 9 months? Okay, still a few. So if you'd had it before 9 months ago, there was one very key giveaway to a slightly different style of spirit, which is the ABV. Previously, when we launched the white rye, it was out there at 40%. And it was really the idea was to kind of showcase, I suppose, what the spirit looks like at a slightly cleaner version as a white spirit. What we just did about 9 months ago is we actually relaunched the white rye at a more hefty 50%.
Anyone notice?
No. Awesome. Great.
It's a good spirit.
And we also changed up the yeast that we used in it. So it's actually a slightly different product to what you might have seen in years gone by. And for me, I think this is a very misunderstood product. I think a lot of people assume that when you bring out a white whiskey or an unaged whiskey, it's really some kind of, ingenious get-rich-quick scheme. And I can assure you it is not.
We're all very, very rich here.
Yeah, I can assure you it is not. The idea is really just to kind of share, I suppose, our vision and what we see when it comes off the still. And it's also, I think, to kind of give you a little bit of an insight into the spirit itself. It's an educational kind of piece. It's more about kind of giving you the raw, unfettered details and kind of letting you see under the hood. In this case, I kind of think of the white rye as, the whiskey's answer to a really classic pot stilled rum. And for me, this is an absolutely killer spirit in a lot of rum cocktails, like a daiquiri, a lot of those sort of classic mixed drinks, like with dry, think sort of dark and stormy sort of territory.
Mojitos.
Yeah, mojitos.
In the springtime.
But also, if you're a real kind of whiskey boffin, it's more about the actual kind of spirit itself. And for me, I'll share my insights, and then I'll hand over to you for yours. For me, the characteristics that really shine through for this, for me, are more along those sort of creamy aspects, sort of like biscuit, and there's real tropical fruit backbone here. So kind of like juicy fruit chewing gum, sort of light banana and pineapple sort of stuff as well. It's refined, it's delicate, it's clean, and it's fairly bright as well. So I think that's really what we're going for.
Pretty key element to note on this. I think it's very easy to perceive, especially a white rye like this. There are a few new make spirits and white dogs out there on the market. It's not just our new make. We have actually, when you're making a new make, my perception, you're making a spirit that's designed to be aged, right? So you might make something that can be a little bit more rough. You want some more really accented flavor compounds in there, because in that maturation process, you're going to round those out, and the end product is not until it's actually being matured, which is why this is actually, it's being produced to be a standalone product, to stand up on its own. It's been distilled in a different way to actually produce an already rounded, ready to drink spirit, essentially, which is a pretty key note, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Has anyone tried any? There's a lot of familiar facts here. I know you've tried a lot of new make before. Do you find that there's some difference here? Obviously there's the core elements. We really want to showcase the spirit character in this, but in terms of drinkability, in terms of how the flavors come across as well, because obviously 50%, a lot of time you're trying stuff at 60, 64 and higher, you find this a little bit more approachable. For everyone watching at home, it was a resounding yes, and people getting out of their seats and everything.
No, people staying in their seats.
Yeah.
In their seats. Yeah.
I think
this has taken a monumental step up into where it sits in terms of how people understand how to use it at 50%.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying with like those rum-based cocktails and those sort of drinks, funny enough, adding that bigger alcohol has made it so much more palatable as a mixer to people, which makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I find it very weird having Scott down here, by the way. He's usually up the back, which is it's much preferable.
Yes, but we're also working in height of importance as well tonight as well. So,
I mean, if you kind of look, I love what you were sort of saying there, and I think you're sort of picking up what I'm putting down as well. If you look to the rum world, I mean, there's a really long history in sort of French-style rum as well, which is to say sort of French island rum, of, clearac, of like basically clear spirit come off the still that's broken down to 50% and is used in really classic drinks like the tea punch, which is basically a variation on the daiquiri. So this is about like a clean, fresh, bright aperitif, something that sort of like wakes you up, and that's really what we're trying to do, just trying to wake everyone up. So wake up, and just so you can kind of see what the rest of the range looks like.
It's a good indication of what you're going to see. So
does that mean that the heart run is so much sort of like the cuts are pretty, you've got a very narrow heart?
Yeah. So we actually do a few things with this one. We crash cool it before in the fermenter, before we bring it through. And this is almost like, it's actually not double distilled. It's like, I'd say 2.6 times distilled. So we recycle some components from the spirit distillation into the wash run. And without going into boring scientific reasons, that's what's really adding to that fruit profile that we're sort of trying to generate there. You'll also notice I picked up on the back palate a nice sort of chocolatey coffee kind of edge as well. And that's kind of coming through really from the way that we're sort of trying to bring it through into the wash run. We're doing quite a short, fast wash run, but by recycling elements of the spirit distillation, we're cleaning it up and getting it nice and bright. Yeah.
So it's similar to the eau de vie style of...
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Question was, does it change much from what the initial runs were with the white rye?
Yeah, it definitely has. I mean, I think that it's an important thing to note, like generally as a philosophy for me. Just because you do something right today doesn't mean you can't do it better tomorrow. And so I think that that's something that we really do take to heart, and we try every day to make the best spirit we can. And that sounds like that sounds so cliched, right? But for us, it is about making the right decisions to make that evolution. So
you see that if we want to get rich quick by doing it, we're doing it the wrong way. Really,
yeah, very much so.
I think one of the key things to look at here, so in terms of mash bill for the spirit that we're tasting now, so it is going to be the same mash bill for the upcoming spirits for most of them.
Most of them. Yeah.
We'll get to that. And the other thing I think to take from that is also just that I think it's an overarching style for us at Archie Rose. We're quite often taking some inspiration from tradition and how it has been made elsewhere, but we're definitely not beholden to that. We're really exploring how to do this the best way, how to get the best thing out of it, and it is really an ongoing thing, which I think is going to be really well showcased here tonight. Should we get on to number 2? I think it'd be worthwhile keeping, and I'll say it now, keeping a little bit of white rye aside, just because it is a really good reference point as you move through, but no stress if you haven't. On to number 2. So normally when I'm doing tastings, this is the carrot at the end, the apex of the tasting, the most exciting one. I will say that we're going from, I'd say, our hardest to sell product of all. Usually we sell it because people thought they were buying the rye malt and they actually end up with white rye. Into definitely the easiest to sell product in our portfolio at the moment, our rye malt whiskey. We're going there next, right?
Yep.
Yep. You can tell we planned out this, where we're going with this. Quite easy. So, I mean...
And why is it the easiest thing for us to sell?
Because awards sell booze. No, so we launched this late 2019. It was our first core range whiskey that we ever launched. Obviously, we planned ahead for big bushfires and global pandemics really well. We were hit pretty hard, as everyone was, I think. But we got super lucky in the timing of World Whisky Awards. So early this year, took out the world's best rye whiskey, which was just, it was big for me. I think for you it must have been bigger.
Yeah, no, it was really good. It was really good. So, I mean, it's sort of an interesting one because, you hear about a lot of awards. This is probably the big one as far as, the Whiskey Awards sort of go.
Well, Whiskey Awards was the Sullivan's Cove one, that we all remember a few years back.
So this beat the whole Buffalo Trace range, including Pappies, including, all the rest of it, right? This, cleaned out, bottles that are 4 times its age, that go for thousands of bottles, that beat that in the competition in a blind tasting.
Some got thousands of bottles.
Thousands of dollars, yeah, correct. Pretty exciting. We were pretty chuffed. Pretty nice little kind of achievement. So this one is, I suppose, a pretty weird rye whiskey. Yeah. Because it's not just it's not a rye whiskey as you understand it from America, and it's not even a rye whiskey as is being made in Scotland even, or in some of the other sort of European nations. We tried to define that and try and be quite upfront with people about that differentiation in the name. And I often talk about the name with this because I think it is quite important. This isn't a rye whiskey, this is a rye malt whiskey.
Is anyone a big rye drinker, typically?
Yep.
Yeah, few, cool. I've never been, by the way, just till this. But.
Okay. Just saved it.
Yeah.
So this is made with 75% malted rye. And, we'll talk about the actual grain itself, a little bit more, but it has a really important impact for the sort of style of spirit we made. So typically for an American rye whiskey, you would use unmalted rye. And the sort of flavor profile that would tend to generate is, a real spice-forward style of whiskey. So, big sort of baking spices, big sort of pepper, chili, there's heat, there's impact, there's intensity. It's usually very herbal as well. So usually like dill and pickles is like something that you would normally sort of pick up in an American rye. We didn't want to go down that road. And there's nothing wrong with that style. I love a good, big, bold spice bomb of a rye. But what we wanted to do is kind of pull that back and kind of take it almost in the direction of a Speyside. If we were a Speyside distillery and we were making rye whiskey, it might look something like this. But also really to kind of reflect, I suppose, that innovation and how we do things. We don't mash in with the grains all together. The grains don't make it to the still like they do in America. We don't use a column distillation like they do in America. So it's kind of somehow somewhere between a weird Scottish, Australian, American fusion.
Pan-global.
Yeah, pan-global. And so the rye malt whiskey is really about making a sipping whiskey. It's something that's approachable. It's something that is accessible in the glass. That doesn't that you want to sit down and enjoy. It doesn't sort of need to go into a cocktail to sort of show its best.
Bear in mind as well, guys, while we're not currently producing, while we get the second site, which is close. If you have any big questions about the second site, please ask them. But everything that we're tasting tonight has been entirely made here. Aside from the malting itself, every other bit has been done right here in this distillery. I mean, you can sort of see on the floor where racks were for holding the grain and everything. This is very much where it's all happened. So, very important to know.
Yeah.
Which batch is this?
I don't even know.
It's a good question. Well, we got a lot of those sort of questions when we won the award, especially around which batch won the award. We don't actually keep we don't keep batches separately in terms of where we're keeping stock and all that. It's just rye malt is the stock keeping unit. So we're not keeping track of which ones. Consistency-wise, they should all be pretty much the same, right?
Yeah. It's a really important question, and we actually get it quite a bit. And it's quite an interesting talking point because we had this discussion a few years ago. for our gins and so on, we use batch codes and so on a lot, and well, why is that? We're not celebrating the diversity of the batch. The reason is because we want to show transparency in what we do, and you can pick up the bottle, find the batch code, go on our website, type it in, and pull out every cask that was in that batch, every detail about how it was produced. So it gives that transparency. I'm also a massive believer in the fact that a batch, even if you are from one of the largest producers in the world and you are so honed and so good at batch consistency, I still believe that there is some inherent difference from batch to batch with different whiskies.
You're only human, right?
Yeah.
No matter what you may think of Dave, he is still human.
So for us, I felt like we really wanted to showcase the fact that, this is a slightly different batch. Now, when we make this whiskey, we literally do a blind test. We do what's called a triangle test. So we sit 2 glasses in front of a panel, and 3 glasses, 2 are the same thing, and 1 is the new one. And if you can find the one that is the new one, then we reblend it. If you can't find that new one, then it passes muster and it goes into bottle. And that's really how we do things. So batch to batch, there is almost no deviation with spirit.
In saying that, I suspect it's batch 9.
Nice.
I suspect it's batch 9. But I can neither confirm nor deny, unless Jono feels like sharing his secrets, but he doesn't, clearly.
Yeah.
Really, really exciting spirit. I mean, has anyone not tried it before? Oh, yeah, that's a good sign. It's, yeah. Do you like it? Pressure's on now. Yeah, it's a safe space. If you're trying. Awesome.
Okay. Cool.
I mean, that's another sort of key point with this. I think I love being able to tell people, A, we won this award. B, it's still 120, 130 bucks a bottle. Like, I think that's really important. And it is fairly key to our sort of strategy in the market and what we want to be doing in the market as well. I think the most expensive whiskey we've sold, I think, is 150 bucks. For me, I've come from some brands with some very expensive bottles, and there's definitely been opportunities while working with Archie where people have wanted expensive bottles from us. And I've said, well, you can have 120 bucks a bottle, stuff like that. That's the price we sell that. It is for everyone. It is accessible, and it's always going to stay that way, which is very, very exciting. I think one of the funny stories, whether it's true or not, that I've heard is that Will Edwards, our founder, always said he didn't want to do a Sullivan's Cove, right? Didn't want to produce a whiskey, win a big award, and run out of stock. And we won a big award and we've currently run out of stock. But yeah, like I say, our easiest to sell product. I keep prodding Dave for more and faster.
Yeah.
Does.
Yeah.
But it is one that we are, at the moment where we are as a distillery completely out of stock. Whereas Simon, who runs the bar here, came in tonight and he said, "What do you mean you need 2 bottles for the event tonight?" I was like, "Yeah, we planned to say." I was like, "It's 2 bottles, Like, yeah, I know. So that's sort of the level that we're at. So if you see it out there, definitely buy it, is my recommendation. You'll see it's pretty good as well. In terms of maturation, what you're seeing here is our 100-litre casks. So we're maturing this in predominantly 100-litre virgin American oak casks. So it is going through that traditional sort of American-style maturation. They're air-dried casks for 36 months, which I think is a weird way to say that amount of time. Why not just say 3 years?
I don't know, actually.
But majority of what we're seeing in the releases at the moment is around the 2.5 years mark in terms of maturation.
So we do spend a bit of time kind of looking at oak as well with our releases. It's quite important, I think, because, there's this, again, if you kind of look at the traditional kind of model or like the way you would traditionally make whiskey, there's actually not that much advantage people play to the actual oak itself. And what I mean by that is, there's a lot of finishes, right? Like we're all aware that, you'll see a lot of whiskies out there and they're in some a masala cask or some kind of Vinderborn or like some exotic kind of cask, right? What I'm sort of referring to is the way the cask itself, that raw oak is treated, tends to sort of get missed out by distillers a lot. Now, you talk to winemakers, and it's a completely different story. The way you treat the cask is really important. And so if you say to a winemaker, do you use air seasoned oak? I can guarantee most of them wouldn't even understand the question. Of course they use air seasoned oak. Kilned oak is the stuff that you make furniture out of, right? Like you have to use air seasoned oak. So what does that even look like? Well, what you do is you basically cut the oak, you cut it into logs, and you lay it out in a field, allowing airflow for 3 years. And what happens is very specific bacteria break down the harsh compounds in the oak and free them up. So when you actually get to make a barrel out of it, they're all active. They're all available to be absorbed by the whiskey and kind of come through. And then after that, well, a lot of distilleries are really looking at, and a lot of these come from sort of bourbon lands, are really looking at, well, what impact can we play to that oak? Well, we'll char the barrel. Now, for those of you that don't know, I'm going to go get a stave now.
Conveniently placed staves, might I add.
Just a giant stack of staves
Look at
here. So for those of you that don't know, this is a char layer on a barrel. So basically what they do is they'll take the stave itself and they'll give it a really short burst of intense flame. You can see like it's kind of charred on the edges there.
We'll pass a couple around.
Yeah. So this would be a charred barrel. Now, that's great, but all it's doing is giving you carbon. We all know from all the marketing that we hear from vodka brands and so on, carbon filtration is great for lightening stuff up, right? Now, we want a little bit of that. We want a little bit of carbon. We want it to kind of take some of those really rough edges out and resolve them into a nice, finessed kind of spirit. And it'll do that to some extent. But that's not necessarily all we can do with a barrel. Well, what if we apply a toast to the barrel? And again, in wineland, if you talk about toasting barrels, there's as many colors of the rainbow as there is techniques for toasting a barrel. But again, as distillers, we tend not to talk about that so much. Toasting a barrel is a bit different. What it is basically taking a long, slow, medium heat to the oak. And what happens is it actually penetrates deeper into the oak itself. It breaks down a lot of the really harsh and complex compounds and makes them free up for the whiskey to absorb it. So that can have a bunch of different impacts. The toasting and char levels can give flavors that, or complement or detract from specific styles. So for example, if we want a really young, sort of fruity, vibrant style of spirit, we would probably go for a really light char and heavy toast. And that's really going to give us that fresh, vibrant characteristic. And vice versa. If we want something that's going to be a little bit more oak forward, we're going to go heavy char, we're going to go light on the toast. It's going to deliver a big oak impact, a lot of vanilla, a lot of caramel, a lot of cream. And so we actually use 5 different toast and char kind of compositions. And by filling the spirit into those 5 different types of casks, it means at the back ends, when the spirit's mature, we can actually decant the casks into styles of spirit and really build complexity into the actual spirit itself. So rather than just sort of chucking it all in and sort of trying to make a balance, we're very deliberate in how we're trying to, from the start, create distinct styles that we can actually then use to build complexity and layers and nuance in the final spirit.
Guys, we're 2 whiskies in. Has anyone learnt something entirely new tonight? Because I have already.
How disappointed is everyone that Dave left the oak barrel tastings to come here?
Mate, you've done an awesome job.
I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing what whiskey Scotty makes in a few years once he moves into this one as well.
In a shoe.
I think what you're hearing, I think these are some really key elements and some really exciting elements of Archie as well. Something that I've been really excited about working here. working with a lot of Scotch distillers in the past, you tend to talk shitload about what barrel types we used, and that's really it. I think a lot of the time there's a big focus on how much alcohol yield you can get out, and then it's more about that maturation to really build everything in terms of the character and style. Working here, I mean, there's the amount of focus on grain selection and how that character contributes to the spirit. You may have become familiar with me through some time at Westwood at the time. New World distillation, I think, in terms of whiskies as well, where everyone's heard that sort of 25 to 30% spirit character to 75 or 70% oak character for a classic whiskey. That's where your influence is coming from. I think in New World, more and more you're starting to see, and what I'm really loving about our whiskies, you're starting to see more towards a 50-50. You're seeing more of that spirit character and grain character come through, it's a whole new world. It's really exciting. Which brings us into a beautiful segue into not our next whiskey.
Yeah.
Damn it!
So we're going to skip a whiskey. And we'll come back to it.
Pretend that segue didn't happen. Save it for later.
So we're going to go, for those of you that are keen, we're going to go on to the Ironbark smoked as the next one. The main reason for that, by the way, just in case you're interested, is we're just going for a lower ABV. So we're going to 40, and then we're going to come back up into the low 50s in a minute.
Ironbark. Has anyone not tried this before? Oh, you are in for such a treat. Another one that we had to pry bottles out of Simon's hands for. Entirely sold out. One of my favourite releases that we've done. How many people are peated whiskey fans? This is going to be something entirely different, so don't get your hopes up around the peat. But it's sort of our own take, our Australian version, our sort of a weird way of doing smoky whiskey in our own particular style, in a way that is, I think, super, super Aussie. You're probably quite familiar with how peated whiskey takes on that peated character, how it's all in the malting, it's all that sort of stuff. This has not been done in that way at all. One of the steep learning curves when I joined Archie is how to talk about Ironbark, because it's a whole new system. This one, so it's the same spirit that we were just tasting in the rye malt whiskey in here. So the same mash bill again that we had from the white rye coming across. The big difference here is that we have some great, assets around the place here at the cannery in Rosebery. One of those is Three Blue Ducks restaurant next door, which have a fantastic pizza oven. And to impart the smokiness, we've actually burned some local ironbark wood, some what we call sustainably sourced ironbark wood, so native species of wood in the pizza oven with some big blocks of ice. So kind of a hot smoke infusion.
It's kind of fun to say we smoked ice with Three Blue Ducks. So
I'm going to use that. It's going in the so what a shame we've sold out of the product.
Yeah.
Now you're giving me these gems. Yeah, we do need batch too.
For those of you that don't know, Three Blue Ducks is owned by a bunch of awesome guys. Like, they're just wicked guys. One of them is now super famous. Like, he was one of the MasterChef guys, and now he's one of the judges on MasterChef, Andy. He's just like a super generous, lovely guy. He like literally came in on his day off. He has 1 day off a week. Came in on his day off to like smoke these giant chunks of ice, like just this preposterously weird thing to do in his pizza oven for 8 hours. Just for a couple of bottles of whiskey on the other end. So, massive props to them. And they're
getting down to 1 bottle.
Exactly. There's Chef's Hat restaurant as well. Like I really do rate them if you're interested. But yeah,
they'd be open tonight if anyone's after feed afterwards. Depending on how long we talk for.
There would be. So, I mean, the Ironbark smoke is like, it's just a weird spirit. Literally, we came up with this weird way of making this smoked water, because that's what it is. It's like smoking the ice. It kind of melts and it takes on the smoke from the pizza oven. And we had this smoked water, and we're like, what are we going to do with this? And I just had this crazy idea. Well, you've got cask strength spirit at sort of like 63%. What if you use the smoked water to break it down from 63% to sort of bottling strength? And then, we just wanted to go as hard as we could. So we actually took this past our normal bottling strength of 46 and went all the way down to 40. And that was just to give it as much kind of smoke as we could get in there. But I think it's a very different type of smoke. For me, my poetic tasting note for this is it's smoked damper over a bonfire by the seashore. It's got that saltiness, that savory edge. It's got that real white smoke from a campfire, and it's got that real doughy sort of biscuity character in there as well. And the smoke tends to integrate with the oak for me. I mean, I really love this actually. I'm actually really happy I get to taste it tonight. I think my bottle's done at home. So,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I think key point here, I mean, long history in talking about it, so you always hear the stories, we found a barrel at the back of the warehouse and all that, and you're like, yeah, come on, who's losing like 20, 30 grand barrels? Like, it's not true. You look at a brand like Archie-Rose and think everything here is planned out, worked out to a T and everything. A lot of it is, ending up with some smoky water. What can we do with this? There's a lot of I think it's one of the beautiful things of working with a small, agile company, that's willing to try out stuff. It's not, we're going to make a smoky whiskey, so what do? Copy Scotland, get some peat, get some peated malt, that sort of stuff. Like, let's try something that's truly unique. And if you're going to make an Australian version of smoky whiskey, I mean, I don't think you get much better than this, realistically.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. Show of hands, who enjoys this whiskey?
It's a tough question when the master
Wow.
still is asking you, isn't it?
Maybe. That's awesome. I'm glad you guys like that.
Has anyone had something like this before? Anything that sort of reminds you of this? Yeah. Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not familiar with any other distillery who's done a whiskey in this sort of way. Has it been?
I don't know of anyone that has. I mean, I'm sure someone has come up with
We're on the
something
internet, so I'm
like
sure someone will tell us.
Right.
Soon, yeah.
Absolutely. But yeah, it was just about having a bit of fun and, kind of doing something crazy. The wood fire oven, though, is so intense. Like, I was helping out Andy, and, like, I just walked through an area, and everyone's like, there's a fire. Like, you're literally, you smell like you're excreting campfire from your pores for, like, 48 hours afterwards. So, yeah, it becomes through in the whiskey.
Definitely a bit of that from that when you wash your clothes up for camping trip.
Yep.
Just that
Absolutely.
campfire smoke in a massive way.
Yeah.
You'll notice as well, this is not a perfectly clear whiskey. We haven't filtered this one.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's completely
Exactly.
unfiltered. Like, it's got barrel char, it's got everything in it.
It's just a dirty campfire whiskey. Really.
Yeah, it is.
Which is very, very cool.
And I think, kind of the clarity thing is like an important one to kind of talk through as well. Because we made that call as well. When we said, okay, we want to go to 40% rather than 46%, we knew dropping it that far was going to give us clarity issues. So for those of you that don't know, the magic number in Scotland is 46%. For a lot of Australian distilleries, it's a bit higher actually. But if you're got a keen eye, you'll actually notice that it's cloudy in your glass. If you do get a good whack of it, it definitely does look cloudy as well. And it's an important one because, we're like, well, are we going to filter this? Are we going to potentially tamper with it or what have you? And we really wanted to start the conversation about filtration because I actually think that it's one conversation we actually have not got right. Because there seems to be this really, staunch kind of set of opinions about filtration out there. A lot of brands, proudly kind of proclaim, non-chill filtered, no coloring added, all that sort of stuff. And that's great. If that's your creed and your philosophy, awesome, all the power to you. But filtration can actually be a really cool and important and interesting tool to use if used deftly and correctly. And I guess that's the really important thing to understand. Because if you're filtering in Scotland in winter and it's -6 degrees and you're just barrier filtering, aren't you pretty close to chill filtering anyway? Versus if you're in Kentucky and it's 20 degrees and you're chill filtering and you're bringing it down to -6, it's pretty close, don't you reckon? So there seems to be a little bit more nuance in the conversation, I think, that we need to have about it. Like, what are you actually doing to the spirit? Like, how are you approaching that filtration? Are you using it as a tool or just a mechanism to give you clarity in the glass? Because that, I think, that's the bad bit. That's the bit where you say, for aesthetic reasons, we're removing flavor, rather than we're using filtration as a tool to highlight flavor, to bring flavors together, to do the right thing for the spirit, rather than for the appearance of it. That's my little rant, anyway.
Yeah, I imagine, I mean, knowing the sort of caliber of attendees we have tonight who typically come to oak barrel events, I imagine there's some pretty strong opinions on chill filtration and that sort of stuff. I know, like, sort of across the industry, and if you go along to any of the sort of upper tiers of whiskey events and stuff, you know, that chill filtration is almost a dirty word. You're like, oh, it's going to be bad whiskey if they're chill filtering. I'm losing all the flavour and all that sort of stuff. I think it's really important that it speaks to that element of not just following on where the industry is going, and we're not just doing it or not doing it because it looks better or because it sounds better. I think that's another big part. Marketing's got so much to answer for when it comes to the whiskey industry, and we've seen this massive uptick lately in people learning a lot more about whiskey. Making it a lot more accessible. The whole bit about whether you add water or whether you mix whiskies and all that sort of stuff. Those memes are still going around AWAS and that sort of stuff. Yeah. But have an upfront discussion around it. Chat to people who know more about it and know why you're doing it and that stuff. And if you can answer that question truthfully and authentically, and it's actually for the benefit of the spirit itself, then
if you talk to a winemaker, they'll again talk about filtration as a process, as a means to generating flavor or highlighting other specific flavors. A really great example. So our rye whiskey is chill filtered, right? And I think it's a better whiskey as a result of that process. Our single malt,
actually, apparently,
our single malt whiskey probably won't be, because that process, I feel, doesn't add to the character of that particular spirit. That's not to say if we weren't to release another single malt down the line that had a different set of flavors and balanced differently, that we wouldn't use filtration. But it's just about having that flexibility to use it as a tool where it's applicable, rather than just planting a flag in the ground and saying, we own this, we believe in this, rather than challenging the assumption and doling it out where it actually needs to be doled out.
Look forward to a special release single malt down the line that will be chill filtered. It'll just be Archie single malt chill filtered, limited release.
Maybe it's not a bad idea, actually. I kind of like that.
I want 10%.
Kind of like that.
Yeah. Should we move on to the next whiskey? Question at the end.
Can you talk through any thought process on the color of the bottles? Because one of the pieces in green bottles versus clear. So like the chill filtering.
Absolutely. We had a. Do you want me to?
Yeah, go. I don't know too much about this.
I'm in the middle of discussions at the moment because we do a process tailored spirits. So the way we distill our gins, you're able to jump on our website, decide what flavours you want in there, make your own botanical blend, and have a bottle with your name on it sent out to you within 2 weeks. We do the same with our whiskies. You'll see a few 20 litres up here as well that you can jump on and have a cask of whiskey laid down for you. And a few people have asked if they can have their gins in clear bottles and whiskies in different bottles and that sort of stuff. The answer has been no. We've done a couple of gins in clear bottles lately. Our limited releases at the moment with Sydney Opera House and the Harvest releases, they've all been in clear bottles, but for very specific reasons. So the Opera House ones have a beautiful, beautiful back label that sort of shines through and all this, and the Harvest has some of the orange blossom giving a slight colour to it. This whiskey, we went into bottles in 2019, and we had it bottled for today, especially. And we finally got the bottles. I picked them up this afternoon and looked at them and was like, They're in clear bottles.
Are they?
They're in clear bottles. They shouldn't be. So Scott's already stealing a bottle from someone. I'd say it adds to its collectability. Yeah. So we are quite particular around them. I mean, there's. I don't think that typically our whiskies are in a smoked coloured bottle. I don't think it's for any reason around hiding or showing the colour by any chance. I think probably because they look nice. Essentially, green obviously is a very traditional gin colour. Vodka's got clarity on it, but yeah, that'd be my little story around that. Is that these are, show them off to your friends because this will never happen again. It's now been picked up, and words we had. So very extra special release for you guys.
Nice attention to detail, though. I didn't even notice.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Please, guys, if you do have any other questions, just jump up. I think nothing worse than a lecture style presentation. Also, can we all just appreciate when we were looking at table layout? I forgot to mention at the start. We wanted to recreate the oak barrel experience as much as possible. Hence the beautiful U shape. We looked at possibly the tables down the side. We thought you would be nice. So, like I say, a lot of thoughts go into this.
Does it mean Scotty gets to sign the wall here?
Yeah.
I'd have to do some actual work to do that, I think.
There's some spray paint somewhere, I reckon.
Next whiskey time, eh?
So we're going to go back now to Dram 3.
Remember that time when we did a beautiful segue into talking about grain? Remember those times? Yes, excellent. Well, next up. I think not a bad one to do alongside the Ironbark, because especially talking about Australia, obviously oak barrel, we're quite proud of being an Australian distillery. Quite proud of being based in Sydney. So much of what we do is focused on local gin botanicals. We're trying as much as possible to source locally, and grain as well. As much as possible, we are trying to source locally. We do a hell of a lot of work with the guys at Voyager in sourcing grain, but also developing new grain as well. This is a great example. I think this is probably pretty close to Dave's heart, this one.
Yeah, so when we started up and we were... Oh, my voice is really...
Yeah. This might be the only session that gets a Dave speaking at.
When we started up and we were looking to make rye, we started looking around for malted rye. There was no one malting rye in Australia. In fact, it's a pretty uncommon thing to malt. So we started importing rye from Germany, malted rye. Really high quality. It's really good grain, but we're an Australian distillery. What the hell are we doing bringing rye in from Germany? And, as a broad concept, we try to source everything we can from right here. We're one of the most productive grain growing nations in the world. I think in the world we're the 5th largest barley producer. We grow a bucket load of wheat as well, and rye as well. But there was no one malting it, and so we started to look at, well, hey, how do we start this? How do we start this conversation? How do we work with people to get this happening? And we came across, Dan was mentioning these guys out in Griffith, 4th generation farmers that were growing really interesting rye. So this rye was actually picked up at it's like the farmer's equivalent of a garage sale. It was basically like this farmer was retiring. He had this old grain, and he sold it on as this rye, and it had been grown in that local area of sort of Griffith, Callambie for 60 years, and was probably originally an imported grain.
Western New South Wales, guys. Sort of central western for those of you who aren't familiar.
It was probably originally an imported grain, but what had happened was, like all great things, they adapted to Australia and New South Wales climate. So I've seen this. I've been there for harvest. When they harvest this grain, you can look in the field and it sort of undulates, like it's not even. And when they actually harvest the grain and you put it out in your hand, some of the grains look very different to one another. There's less consistency. So they call it land race. It's basically mutated and grown and adapted to the Australian environment.
Remember, guys, I think when you look at most grain producers and the real commercial grains, consistency, is quite a big part of that. And you'll see that's those, typical videos of grain fields, and they are all perfectly the same height, and all the grains the same sort of size. And you know what you're going to get out of it. You know the yield you're going to get. You know the starch content, all that sort of thing.
You're leading me into a rant. Grain in this country is like...
You haven't got time? No one needs to be anywhere, right?
I don't know if I've got the voice,
Yeah.
but grain in this country is a commodity. And really we need to stop thinking about it as a commodity. Like, our farmers are growing, amazing quality products, and they should be paid a fair price for what they manufacture. But, this rye is so special, and it comes originally from Sandigo. That was where the sort of farmer's equivalent of a garage sale was. And so it had grown up in Sandigo. And so we really wanted to honour this grain. We use a fair bit of it. For those people that say that malt doesn't matter, this is my tribute to that comment. Because if you have any of the original rye malt whiskey...
You're not tribute, not helping them out, right?
It's fine. Whatever. Tribute, counter, whatever.
Yeah.
If you have any of the rye malt whiskey left in your glass and you go side by side, these are completely different whiskies. And they are manufactured in exactly the same way. The only difference is one is 75% Sandigo heritage rye and one is 75% imported German malted rye. And they're, the sort of flavours I get from the Sandigo rye, they're Australian flavours. I get eucalyptus, I get tea tree, I get that real sort of, minty character. On the palate, there's a really broad back palate spice. There's some lovely sort of violets and sort of floral edges to it as well. And, it just carries. It tends to stick around. We're up at 52% with this dram. But I think, if nothing else, this is an amazing kind of journey into the differences between grains. So we're now working with them really closely. We're growing all kinds of awesome grain, and they're really scaling up. The amount that they have, and we're working with them growing some amazing stuff. Like they grow a purple hull-less barley. So you can pick up the grain as this like bluey purple color. It doesn't even have a husk on it like normal barley does. They grow other barleys, which is, we don't even have a name for it. It's just like this black barley. It's not roasted. That's just what it looks like when it comes off the field. It's black. And it's amazing, in the recent droughts that they had out there, and I'll show you the photos if you come and say hello after. In the recent droughts they had out in New South Wales and so on, all commercial crops failed. And they were growing this black barley, right, out in the field. And, the farmers were saying they were getting their neighbours stopping and saying, what the hell are you doing? You put in new irrigation, mate. Because it was lush and green. Everything else was dead. But this stuff is, 6,000-year-old ancient variety. And it's surviving the drought. That's what it's survived for 6,000 years. It's going to survive a little trifle like a drought. Same with something like the Sandigo rye. In the droughts, it still suffered, but it did okay. We could still get a crop out of it because for 60 years, it's toughed it out in New South Wales, come drought, come flood, come whatever it comes. And, that's really a testimony to the whiskey itself. I'm really fond of saying that whiskey doesn't start its life in the distillery. It starts its life in the field. And as whiskey drinkers, we should appreciate that actually what makes whiskey important and unique and cool is actually the grain that goes into it. Because if not, then, well, why isn't it rum? Why don't we just use sugar? Why, what's the difference between cognac and whiskey? If the raw material doesn't matter, then surely we could use anything. So, yeah, that's my rant. Anyway, yeah.
I think what a beautiful tribute to Aussie farmers as well. Stuff that has toughed it out for 60 years out there in the Australian climate. This is it in a glass. Am I right in thinking that the alcohol yield on this was significantly lower than...
It was a bit lower, yeah.
Yeah,
it was
standard rye malt. I mean, this is I think, one of the lovely parts of what we're doing in working with Voyager and a lot of the grain producers, we're getting bigger at Archie Rose, and our appetite for grain is getting bigger as well. And one of the really nice outcomes of us working on these new grain styles and everything is that for the wider industry, for Australian distilling, these are now grains that are going to be available for them to use. Like that, if you're a small distillery, you don't really have the buying power to go and commission farmers to lay down fields of these different grains and all that sort of stuff. But because of the work we're doing, people get access to these wider style grains and everything. So
Yeah,
a nice story for the wider industry as well.
yeah, definitely.
Very cool.
And now the big gun.
Whew.
I didn't make it, mate.
You selected it.
Thoughts on the Sandigo? Is anyone sort of, a few nods? He's seeing that Aussie character come through in it. Yeah, remember it is 52, so don't be shy with the water either. I think it stands up really well with it. It's actually been really interesting. We tried this when it first went into bottles. I remember it came round with the samples, and we as a sort of the sales and marketing team in the office had a try, and we sort of, whoa, it's a big boy. Like it was big and bold, and it was a full-on whiskey and everything. And it's been really interesting to see how it's actually matured in the bottle as well, and it's sort of settled down a bit and come through really, really nicely, which is very, very cool.
It has much more spice than I think the normal.
Oh yeah,
sort of one.
100%. Something incredibly special. I think something I'm very proud to present to people as well. And sadly, again, it's long sold out. But if you can find it, do, because I think a very, very special whiskey. Number 5. So, we thought, we found this great cask. We've bottled it for you guys. I know I've got some bottles at home that I think are too special for me to open to have a taste of. At some point there'll be that special occasion, I assume, so I'll go around to taste them. But why not have a taste while we're here tonight of the cask that you're getting to take home? We started this process chatting with Scotty, Whisky Fair, Whisky Forum, what's something really special we can do? Let's do a single cask bottling. I then took that conversation to Dave and said, what have we got that's something really special to commemorate, all these ties that all of us have to Whisky Fair and the oak barrel. What can we do to really do that justice? And he came out, he said, 3 casks. One's really good, one's incredibly good, and one is absolutely outstanding. I was like, you're going to give us the outstanding one? I was like, no, give him the really good one. No, you're going to the outstanding one, the absolute. So, I think really special. This is, it's safe to say, your favourite single cask?
Yeah. You missed out the bit. I said, who's it for? You said,
Yeah, that's
Scotty.
true, yeah.
I said, give him the best one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Scotty.
Yeah.
So I think a fitting home for Dave's favourite rye cask and a fitting occasion for it as well. We got 106 bottles out of this in total. That's all there is. The label itself was a bit of fun. Scotty did a lot of hunting around. He found a nice, beautiful map.
Yeah. So, look, it came down to very much how can we represent, Oak Barrel and Archie Rose, 2 very famously and proudly independent and Sydney brands. So we had a few ideas going around, but a long story short, we basically got Blake, who works at the store, who some of you might have seen, based off an 1826 map of Sydney, traced it out, but did a version of it that was out of was public domain by now, to sort of do just almost a skeleton of the main part of the city, and then sort of how we then worked that onto the label and tried to plot where Oak Barrel and Archie Rose would have been if we had been around 200 years ago. But then sent some mocks of that to Amanda, who does all the design here, and I owe her more than a couple of drinks to taking a crazy idea that was pretty simple, and we made it very, very complicated to what we see on the bottles at the moment. And I think as well, I didn't know, I'd seen photos and I'd seen small format samples of this whiskey, but the vibrancy of this colour. We were joking before that we've actually given you bottled Negronis instead of actual whiskey. It's such a beautiful, vibrant, deep red colour. I'm so glad that we lucked out and sort of kept the label white, and then also lucked out with clear bottles. I think we're well done, everyone, who decided on that one.
Yeah. This is... I'm always very careful saying the very first, and we've never done it before, but I don't think we've ever done a full single cask rye malt at cask strength before. Am I right? No. So the first time, it's especially special considering the award win earlier in the year, to have a single cask of that whiskey, untouched, cask strength, all of that sort of thing. Ready for you guys is very, very special. We've got some of the cask details on this sheet in front of you. In terms of, you're talking about the oak treatment, looking at medium toast and number 2 char, what does that tell us in terms of what style we want from the spirit?
Yeah, look, I think it shows up in the glass. I mean, for me, if you've got any left, for me, I find this is a really nice balance of that sort of creamy oak that you tend to get from the 36-month air dried. But for me, there's a nice fruit in there. For me, I sort of get like, peach brandy sort of stuff, like peach schnapps almost. There's a really nice kind of cherry pie, and that sort of creaminess kind of moves into that sort of like full sort of vanilla ice cream. There's maybe a bit of sort of like desiccated coconut in there as well, which again is sort of coming from that oak.
If you rub it on your hands and it goes dry, that desiccated coconut comes out massively.
Yeah.
Big way.
It's interesting. Straight from the cask, it was really coming through with a lot of sort of apricot, like sort of dried apricot with sort of like muesli almost. At this proof, it was a nice sort of balance out with some of that oak kind of coming forward a little bit, some of the heat coming off it because it was at 63, which is a pretty mighty strength. And yeah, we kind of felt this was at 52, I believe.
4.2.
54.2. I kind of felt like that was a really nice kind of zone for it to live. For me personally, I find unless the real sweet spot for me is between 50 and 55%. It's not to say there aren't some amazing drams above 55% and below 50. But I find above 55, it tends to have a good reason for being there. And it tends to need to have a really nice weight to it if it's below 50. So we really kind of played to that sort of high, upper sort of 50s there.
I think a great example as well, I mean, a lot of you would be very familiar with single cask bottlings and, S&WS and Adelphi's Berry Brothers and all that, and seeing a distillery style in a very different light. Remembering that a core release is not what every barrel tastes like. There are really some standouts there. I mean, there's also, I think Bertie mentioned on Big Whiskey Questions, there's also some bad casks. There are some that are just not great. But there is a full spectrum in the maturation warehouse. So this is, I think, an absolute just phenomenal example of our rye malt whiskey.
Yeah. So how this came about, and I'll say on the palate, you really do get a lot of that stone fruit on the palate. And a lot of bread and butter pudding, and has like a butteriness to it as well. For me, I mean, the way we kind of do our cask selections is we taste every cask. So when we're looking to put an actual blend together, we'll sample everything in a wide radius of what we think will be mature. And I go through, I nose everything. And in a lineup, I was probably about 40 casks in of a morning. And, this one popped up and I just went, I think this one's too good to kind of put in the blend, kind of put it aside. And then I did another round with it as well. And I said, look, I just don't think it belongs in the blend. It needs to stand on its own. So, and that's really what we put it aside for. We didn't know what it was going to be aside for, but
we were just waiting for something big.
Exactly right.
Has anyone ever had to say that before? It was of a morning and I was 30 casks deep. Something only a distiller can say, I think, realistically. What do we think? If anyone doesn't like it, I'm happy to take their bottles off their hands. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So it would have started out exactly, identically to the rye malt whiskey, classic rye malt whiskey. I think that's
Yep.
cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The wooden staves you sent around, since the chart 2, what would that have been?
The staves,
Yeah.
I have no idea. I
We
don't
usually
know what
record on
barrels
the
these
barrel
are.
head, so there's obviously missing
Yeah.
the barrel head as
But
well.
yeah, you would know whether that's a chart 2 or 1 or 3.
I'd say this is only a char.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say this is only a char.
Which would be a char one.
This is probably. See, there's so many different ways to it. I'd say it's like a medium char. I'd say this is a single malt cask. I'll find out.
Give it a lick
I'll
and
get-
let us know for real.
Yeah. I'll get your number. I'll find out. I'll let you know. Yeah.
So you would say that this one had no char on the single one. Sorry, the single.
I would say that the one that the cask for this, I probably have less char than that.
Less char.
Yeah. So it's more about. So this would have had like a fairly protracted sort of toast and a fairly short, reasonably sharp kind of char. Yeah. With that 36-month air dried oak. Yeah.
That makes sense for the flavours that are coming through on it as well.
Yeah, I think
Big
so.
way. You're both gentlemen, I have to say.
What was that? Sorry. This one is yeah.
How did you decide on
Yeah, initially we tried 3 different ryes. You can imagine Australia 6 years ago, there was not a wealth of options for imported malt rye or rye malt at all. So we tried 3. We tried an American one, which was actually our least favourite. And we tried 2 German ones, actually. And this was our favourite of all 3. But, we're kind of really working pretty hard on finding something, sourcing it locally. I mean, that just fits who we are as a nation as well as a distillery. But also I think that, by having that relationship with the grower, we can inform the flavour that we want to get out. We can start to look at that. So a great example, and I love the name of this malt, is Vampire Rye. So we have a rye called Vampire Rye that's being grown for us. And that's got an amazing sort of biscuity, nutty sort of character. It's not at all fruity. It's not at all vibrant.
It smacks of craft beer.
Yeah.
Vampire
Maybe.
Rye.
Yeah, doesn't it? I love the name, right? It's just awesome. And the Sandigo, so the heritage rye, we're keeping on, and that's got that really herbal edge to it. It's maybe a little bit more brash, like it's a little bit more bold and kind of lets you know what's going on. But yeah, we're trying to work with a lot of these varieties to kind of showcase the differences you can achieve, and also just create a tasty product. Yeah.
So you're doing quite a bit of experimenting. How much are you starting to pay for cask types outside of the
Questions around cask types and what are we doing outside of the norm and experimenting with?
We do a bit. Yeah, we do a bit. I won't say too much, but I think, there is a lot more that can be done. I mean, the toasting and charring on its own, right? I mean, like most guys don't even look at that. There are all kinds of things you can do to a barrel. Like you can toast it in ovens. You can do all kinds of other stuff. We are starting to look at running some trials on virgin American oak, but we're also doing because why buy ex-bourbon casks which are kiln dried, probably with no air seasoning, all that sort of stuff. And we have these amazing virgin casks that we've used once. We know what's good, like we know which casks maybe to avoid, and maybe should we go to use furniture or what have you, and which ones which we can use to make good product. So
We're going to have a lot of them.
of the X-Rye.
Our X-Rye.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of questions coming through on the Facebook chat as well, but Dave, in his really wide-ranging, tends to answer the question before I get a chance to ask it. But one from Gerald comes in with, in terms of your 36-month air drying regime, what is it about 36 months? Why not 48? Why not 24? Why is that the sweet spot?
For us, we have done some trials on the different extents of the air drying. We just found 36 made a really mellow, soft spirit. Tannins are really soft and rounded and fine. But we are also looking at shorter air seasoning times with different techniques as well. So, yeah, stay tuned. We'll sort of get around to it, I think. Yeah.
On your cask question, my advice whenever I come to the distillery at Roseby is always just look at everything. You'll notice in the bar we've got some red gum casks.
They've come out.
There's no red gum casks.
Yeah.
But just keep your eyes out. It's the best way to pick up on.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we've done some pretty gnarly things with casks, really. We have about 20 ex red gum casks, and they're pretty amazing. So they actually came out of McWilliams Winery. If you haven't picked up from like my numerous references to wine in this conversation, I come from a long history of winemakers. So my dad's a winemaker, my grandfather was a winemaker. My dad worked at McWilliams, and we heard about these kind of ex red gum casks from McWilliams that have been used for sherry for a long time. And it's pretty cool. We managed to get hold of them, and we managed to hear about them. And I called up my dad and I said, what's the story with these casks, And he's like, why? Why? It was like, they were manufactured as holding vessels for wine in the 1930s. So during that period, you couldn't buy imported American or French oak. And so they used a lot of native timbers. They used eucalyptus, which apart from being fairly toxic, also apparently makes terrible wine. But they also used New South Wales red gum. And so this wine was storing ex-fortified wine from Griffiths, from McWilliams. It was crafted from New South Wales barrels. And it's a pretty gnarly experiment to see how they're going to go. I don't know that they're going to see a full-term maturation, if I'm honest, from the cask samples I've seen. But yeah, we're trying some fun stuff out, because why not, right? Like, we're in Australia, we've got a long history of distilling in Australia, but no one's been doing much of it for a while. So it's up to us to kind of have some fun and do some exploration.
I think that's a pretty key point. It is trying stuff out. I mean, a great example, obviously, we had the bushfires at the start of the year. You may recall, I know a lot's happened since then, but that was this year. We had the Hunter Valley lost 80% of their red wine harvest. And part of that was, what can we do? Can we help out in any way? I think we purchased 50 tonne of smoke-tainted grapes there from Tulloch and First Creek and a few other vineyards up there, and brought it down. And I don't think anyone had distilled grape spirits before in the team, right?
No one had.
It was a whole new thing. We didn't know how it was going to turn out, but it was one of these, let's give it a go, let's see how it turns out. And the resulting spirit was absolutely cracking. Again, if you can find it, it's worth keeping an eye for. But we are a multi-distilling company. I think it's something that's a little bit unusual in Australia at the moment. A lot of people are either whiskey distilleries or gin distilleries, or they might be gin distilleries while they become whiskey distilleries, but we're very much doing a whole broad range of that. And that it means that you can take elements from all different parts and take the best practice and apply them to making whatever spirits you are making, which is really quite exciting. Getting towards the end, I think for anyone who's living under a rock, obviously we have another release coming up soon with some single malts. I thought it might be a good chance if you want to ask any questions of Dave, and then he can tell you that he can't answer any of them. You can know. But yeah, any questions around any of that we've chatted about tonight, or about upcoming stuff, or yeah.
So when you want the award, just curious the percentage of sales international versus Australia. Like, do they
Ah.
accelerate locally or internationally?
Very easy to answer.
Yeah.
Zero increase internationally. We haven't exported yet at all.
Yeah.
So, all locally. I got a question for you.
Yeah. Okay.
Being that you're from a big family of winemakers,
Yeah.
are you the black sheep? Are they disappointed that you haven't followed the family route into winemaking? Or is
Yeah.
it,
I'm pretty much convinced my dad thinks I'm an alcoholic because I'm into like spirits, not wine. You know?
pot and kettle, isn't it?
Yeah. It's kind of weird. I mean, yeah, there's a long answer to that. I'm not
Yeah,
sure
right.
if you want to hear it, but
No, I'm going to save your voice for more
Okay.
useful things for general
Yeah.
public.
yeah.
Cool. Any other questions, guys? Awesome. Well. Ooh.
No. So there's two answers. One is no, and the other is every bottle has an age statement. Because you can take that batch number and go online and you can see every cask, when it was filled and when it was decanted that went into that barrel. You can't do that in Scotch whiskey, but we can in Australia. So that's what we're doing. So yeah, we're really transparent with what we do, but I don't think that an age statement is necessarily what we're aiming for. We're definitely going to see gradually over time an increase in the age in our spirits. We're about to start laying down 500-litre casks. We've already got some that are aging in as well. And they'll age for quite some time. So, yeah. But, probably not explicitly. I'll never say never, but probably not explicitly. Yeah.
That was number one learning in joining Archie Rose. Never say never when it comes to this company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with the climate here in Sydney being a bit rather than somewhere like Tasmania, how are you finding spirit ages?
Yeah, we lose a lot of spirit. We're almost subtropical here. It's pretty amazing. We sort of forget about it in winter, but during summer, in February, when it's just like 95% humidity and 35 degrees out, it's not that much different to the Caribbean, really. There's big, massive difference, and we're definitely seeing a change. Rosebery here, we're pretty close to the ocean. Where our new distillery is, we're very close to the ocean. And that's, really quite important. We chose that site because we wanted to be close to the ocean. And what that means is we'll see less extreme swings, and it'll also be a bit more humid. So, and casks tend to like that humidity. So, yeah.
I think that's, it is a very different area. And a lot of people, like Dave Broom, obviously talks about terroir in whiskey quite a bit. It is a very different climate in Australia. There's no way around that. I think to look at making whiskey and try and replicate Scotch style in Australia, and sort of the point of difference is that the climate's a bit different. Why not look at the whole process? Knowing that is the end result of it, and make your whiskey with that in mind. Essentially,
Absolutely.
So what is your ABV into barrel, and typically what does it come out at?
Yeah, so we go in at 60%, and typically we'll come out somewhere around about 61 to 62. Yeah. So it's actually not much of a creep up, but still a creep. Yeah.
So you cut this down just a little bit less.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. I don't know why it ended up at 54.2. I'm pretty sure I said break it down to 54, but it must have just come out with a 0.2 added to it.
again, human.
Yeah. I don't know why. But yeah, we weren't trying to be cute with the ABV. It was just, it's not natural cask strength, it's just cask strength. Yeah. I guess before we wrap up, I want to say a big thank you to Scott, because, this humble little fella here, Scott does such an amazing job for the oak barrel. And really, he was giving me massive props at the beginning, but a lot of them are false. Without Scott, I think, it's taken us such a fresh direction. The fact that we're doing this live streaming at the moment, the fact that he's looking to do it off-site here at Archie Rose and what have you, amazing innovation, amazing sort of pick of barrel. I just wanted to put my hands together for Scott. doing such a great job.
Paul guy hasn't slept for a week now, isn't he?
Yeah, and that is definitely incorrect. But thank you, I appreciate it. But one of the things that I felt that we were going to miss from Sydney Whisky Fair is having everyone in a room and having so many people talk about whiskey in different ways. And hopefully we've recreated that a little bit with the way that Dave talks about whiskey and the way he talks about the barrels and the rye is completely different to a Scottish distiller who talks about them. We had Laura Hay, who hasn't been at the Oak Barrel for a couple of years now, on Saturday on one of the streams, and I've forgotten how beautifully she talks about whiskey. And yeah, 100%. What I do love about the way that Dave not only talks about whiskey, but puts everything into the whiskey. And we said this the last time I think you presented in front of an Oak Barrel crowd was Distillers Dinner 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And I said exactly the same thing, is when you follow Dave and follow what he's doing, everything is about the ground and how it's farmed and where it comes from. And I think that is so important in Australian whiskey and in, for lack of a better term, New World whiskey countries, or rather New World whiskey philosophies and ideologies. And that is so important. And it was such a pleasure to be able to associate the Oak Barrel brand with a brand like Archie Rose. And I remember we did a gin about 4 years ago. That was very much a tailored gin, where we sort of sat up on the top mezzanine there and went through and had a few stabs at making a gin that essentially was to fuel Scots Negronis for that summer. But when it came to the whiskey and we were talking about what do we want, it was, and then like you very kindly say it was my barrel pick. I was like, no, I want nothing to do with it. Just I trust Dave implicitly to find me something. And I've been lucky enough to work on a lot of cask selections and cask picks in the past, 5-6 years at the Oak Barrel. Probably the first one I was involved in that some people might remember is Glendronach single cask, which actually you had teed up, but Archie Rose had started up by the time the samples got to us, so we got together and did that. But I honestly can say that this is the cask that I'm most proud of, I think, for what it is, for what it represents, for being so close to the process. Even putting aside facts of when does the Oak Barrel, a humble little bottle store with 4 employees in Sydney, get to bottle a single cask of the world's best rye whiskey, like putting that sort of stuff aside, just the way that this velvet hammer with so much complexity and depth blew me away the first time I tried it, and that Dave would even consider, letting the Oak Barrel, get their hands on this cask is really touching me. So thank you. You're not bad yourself for actually teeing this up.
I like touching it.
Because there was a lot of phone calls, as I said, with Amanda, and even this morning, you're going, okay, we need table settings. We didn't know 24 hours ago whether this could still go ahead. There's every possibility something could flare up, and all of a sudden we'd be okay. We'd be doing this in a very different format. So for the Archie Rose team to be so flexible, for you guys to be so flexible, I really appreciate it. And there's one other thing that I want to say quickly. It came through from, I think it was Johnny Raff, who's a very good friend of the Oak Barrel, and again, a very common face at various whiskey fairs over the years, but obviously stuck down in Melbourne like a lot of people are. And so he said, Dave Withers, great to see you delivering the vision you had for taking AU forward as an innovator. And I think that was a really, really good point, that when I learnt whiskey through Dave as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old drinking at the Oak Barrel, and you could feel it then. And then when Archie Rose was starting up, we didn't really know what it was. And yes, it's taken a few different turns and done things that we didn't expect it to do. But we knew that Dave had a vision for what he thought whiskey could be globally, but also from Australian point of view. And the stuff that he introduced to me and the stuff that he's championed, famous distilleries now. So I thought that was a really good point that we get to now look into. And he's a very busy man. I don't think these two have actually presented a tasting together before, even though they definitely should have. It's such a pleasure to actually get him in front of all of you guys and in front of the stream, because he's got distilling to do and new distilleries to build and commission, all that sort of stuff. To see your process on a personal level as a friend, and to see that we are still kind of at the very, very start of this is so exciting for me. So for everyone, whether you're at home, in your bedroom, and unfortunately we didn't let you come at home because you're too close. We're going to put you in front of the camera every time. But everyone here, we get a round of applause for Dave, all the team that put this together, and everyone really, really important. Awesome.
As usual as well, guys, massive thank you to all of you for coming down, making this such a special night. The bar is open tonight. We're obviously limited with COVID in terms of how much we can fit in there, but if you're keen for a drink, they have some fantastic bottles over there. S&W's, Adelphi's, local Aussie whiskies and gins as well. Go and have yourselves a drink. We'll be around as well. I think assuming we can fit in, you're welcome to mill around here as well for a little while too. I think that's it. Yeah, wraps it up.
That's all she wrote.
Thank you very much again.
Thanks
Until
so much,
next
guys.
time.